Renting has got a bad rap in Canada for the last several years, and most Torontonians think one of the best ways to build wealth long term is by purchasing and owning real estate. For the last decade, we've seen unprecedented price growth, and that's made that assumption largely correct. And today, we're going to discuss whether or not, with the current market conditions, interest rates, and the shift in the market prices, if that still holds true. So if you want to hear my thoughts on renting versus buying in Toronto, then keep on watching. Before we get started, I'm Nause with the Homeplicity Realty Group here at Keller Williams, and I'm passionate about helping our clients build and develop wealth through real estate. If you're interested in tips on buying a home, selling a home, or investing in Toronto real estate, then I hope you'll consider subscribing to our channel. If you enjoy this type of content, go ahead and give it a like, and feel free to share this video with anyone that you think would benefit from the content. Renting versus buying. Which is going to make the most long-term sense for you? That's what we're going to discuss today. And if you have any thoughts on the topic, and if you were planning on buying in 22 or 2023, and maybe you're still going to or not going to, go ahead and comment down below and let us know where your head is at. So I think the biggest factor when you're deciding whether or not you should be renting or buying is going to be the length of time that you're planning on staying in the property. The longer you stay in the home, the more cost effective it's going to become. And the reason for that is because the value of the property is going to increase over time. And then the costs associated with purchasing or selling the property get spread out over a longer time period. The costs that you could be expected to pay would be things like real estate fees, legal fees, closing costs, and then land transfer tax on the purchase. So we'll do a little case study so that you can get kind of a sense for how those numbers play out. In Canada, since 1970, the average price growth per year, the amount that the home value has increased over a 1 year time period, has been between 4 and 7%. So if we take the bottom end of that price point at about 4% growth for 1 year, and we take a look at an entry-level condo that a first-time buyer would be looking at in, say, a neighborhood like Fort York, let's assume $600,000. So if we take that $600,000 property and assume that the buyer is going to own it over the next 10 years, the value of that $600,000 condo is going to go up to $888,000. So almost a 3% increase. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it, right? The closing costs for that property, let's assume between 5 and 6%, which is around $45,000 to $50,000. If we take a look at this scenario, the value increase in the property, the appreciation is significantly more than enough to cover the closing costs. That's someone that would be looking back and saying, yeah, I'm pretty grateful that I bought this property for $600,000 now. If we take the same $600,000 condo and someone that's only planning on staying in it for 1 year, what does that look like? Well, if we assume the same 4%, the value goes from $600,000 to $624,000. And then at 5% closing cost, that's around $31,000. So we can see there's going to be a little bit of a gap, and it would actually cost you money to have had that property for that year. It doesn't make sense. So now that we know 10 years looks great and 1 year not so much, what is the sweet spot that we're recommending to our clients? On average, I tell people that you need to own your home for about 3 to 5 years for you to see any sizable price appreciation and profit after all the costs, so that you can roll it into the next property and maintain your payments on around the same level. If we take a similar 1-bedroom condo, that unit would be leasing for around $2,500 a month. So a $600,000 condo in Fort York would be around $2,500 in monthly rent. And if you assume that most first-time buyers probably have around 10%, maybe a little more if they're getting help from the bank of mom and dad, and interest rates are what, around 4.59% right now, you should be able to get that rate. So if we take that same 4% price growth versus that $2,500 rent, the sweet spot where it starts to make a lot more sense for you to own the property and it's more profitable is at 3.17 years. So that means you have to own the property for about 3 years in order for it to make sense for you to be owning it. Besides the financial incentives that entice people to be moving forward and purchasing the property, there are some other key points that make it either more attractive to rent or more attractive to buy. From an ownership perspective, you have more security. So you don't have to worry about getting evicted. With 60 days notice in the mail if your landlord decides to sell, if they decide to move back in, or if your landlord decides to sell or they want to move in themselves or have one of their family members move in, or they need to do extensive renovations on the property and you get evicted during this time period. That can be super inconvenient, and there's costs associated with moving as well if you have to do that every year. And the second thing, I think the best thing about being a homeowner is you have the rental income. If you decide that you are not going to live in the property, you're going to be relocated, or you're going to move in with a partner or spouse, you can keep that property and rent it out and have the tenant pay the mortgage. Or if you're in a building that allows short-term Airbnb, then you can rent out the property short term, depending on the various rules for the building and your province. Or you can do something like what I do, which is rent out your basement apartment, or if you have a 2-bedroom condo, you can rent out a room in there and offset some of the costs. And then I would say the last thing, the really big incentive, is the long-term investment opportunity with owning a property. So over time, the value of the property is going to go up, as we discussed. And especially when interest rates are low, it makes sense to tap into that equity to borrow against it, to invest back into the property, to do things like home renovations, or even to purchase another income property or investment property. And that's something that you just don't have the benefit of when you're renting, because you pay your rent and then it's gone at the end of the year. You don't really have anything to show for it. You're paying down your landlord's mortgage and they get the benefit of that instead. Now, when would it make more sense to rent? Well, we already talked a little bit about this. If you need the flexibility, if you're planning and you know you're planning on leaving in a year and you don't want to have the stress of being a landlord and having to rent the space out, then you're going to have to move again. So you have the flexibility that you know you can do that. Maybe you weren't super into the building or into the neighborhood that you were living in, or your financial situation has changed greatly and you do want to look at purchasing. You have the ability to be able to do that. You don't have those closing costs for selling, that 5 or 6%. You do have to obviously come up with first and last month's rent, and you don't have to come up with a large down payment of 10-20% in order to make your move. So, and there's less maintenance. If the dishwasher breaks, if the roof has a little leak, you don't have to worry about any of those things. You just call your landlord and say, hey, come and fix this. I need a new dishwasher. I need the roof to be fixed. You're not going to have to do all this shoveling and grass cutting and some of those things that a homeowner would do, because it's their property and there's that pride of ownership. So what do you think? Are you going to take the plunge into home ownership, or are you going to continue renting for the foreseeable future? Let us know in the comments down below. My 2 cents. Toronto is not an easy market to get into. Our prices are high, our rental prices are sky high right now, and they're going to likely continue to be on the increase and stay very competitive in the rental market until interest rates start coming down again. Who knows when that's going to be? So expect to be paying a lot of money in rent and have a lot of competition. And it's really hard to save up for a down payment. Like when we're talking about a $600,000, $800,000, $1.2 million property, that 10 or 20%, that's a sizable chunk of money. And it's very hard to do that when you're paying $2,500 to $3,000 a month in rent. And that's why we see a lot of young people choosing to stay at home with their parents until they've saved up that down payment in order to be able to purchase. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you like the content. Those are my 2 thoughts, renting versus buying. I think at the end of the day, you have to decide what makes the most sense for you and your lifestyle and your long-term plan. Are you able to make that commitment of 3 to 5 years? That's something that you definitely want to think about. If you're interested in having some more conversations about what it would look like to get into the market, feel free to reach out. We're happy to come up with a custom plan for you and timeline. And you can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Homeplicity Realty. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.